to running on-prem is that it does not have a SQL Server agent. So if you have agent jobs that run your backups or agent jobs that run business logic, you need to figure out a different way to get that to happen. The second PaaS offering is called Azure SQL Managed Instance, and it is what it says. It is effectively a full instance of SQL Server, and it is managed within Azure. So when you connect to a managed instance through Management Studio in Object Explorer, you will see potentially multiple databases. You will see your SQL Server agent. It looks and feels very much like a traditional instance of SQL Server. It does allow cross-database queries, and you do have the SQL Server agent there. So that's platform as a service, and then I'm going to talk about infrastructure as a service. And this is basically SQL Server running on an Azure VM. You can go into Azure. You can say, I want to create a SQL Server 2019 instance running on a virtual machine running Windows 2019, and you set the size, you can provision disks, but when you create that, it will create that virtual machine with SQL Server installed. And once it comes up, you can connect to it and you are ready to go. And it will look and feel just like an instance of SQL Server running anywhere. If it's running on a VM in a data center, if it's running on bare metal in a data center, if it's running on your laptop, it is effectively the same thing. You can stand up a SQL Server VM running anything from 2008 R2 to 2019. And in this case, the infrastructure is client managed. So, you can set automatic patching, but it's something that you have to do. It is not on by default. You are responsible for making sure both the OS and SQL Server get patched. So does anybody have any questions about the difference between PaaS and IaaS?
Yeah, for that infrastructure one, that you said you could do automatic patching, and is that both the OS and SQL patching?
I believe it is. Jared, can you confirm or deny?
Yeah, it should be. And you're talking about using the Azure IaaS extension?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep, it should take care of patching both.
Yeah. So there's an extension that you can have installed. You can say, I want to install this when you create a SQL Server VM from an image, and then you can also, you do have the ability, if you want to do a custom install, you can create a VM running the operating system of your choice, Windows or Linux, and then you can do the SQL install yourself. And in that case, if you wanted to take advantage of the automated patching, you would have to install that SQL IaaS extension. So that answer your question, Ross?
Yeah, it sure does. Thank you, sir.
All right, cool. No problem. Thank you, Jared. So now we're going to get into the backup and restore options for PaaS. And for PaaS, they are somewhat limited because the backup management of backups is part of that platform as a service management. And as I say here, they are fully managed, and this includes both the backup schedule and the location that your backup files write to. You have the ability, when you create a VM an Azure SQL Database or managed instance, you have some control over the backup retention, both in terms of point-in-time recovery and long-term retention. And you cannot access these backup files. They are written to storage within Azure, and you cannot pull down, a .bak file and restore it somewhere else. It's all managed within Azure, and it's kind of set it and forget it. One other important point is that if you have a vendor tell you that they can back up an Azure SQL database, they cannot. Microsoft has not exposed the APIs for backups of Azure SQL Database or managed instance. And I have had a vendor tell me this, and they had convinced the client I was working with that they could do it. And it was exciting to try to fight that fight. So just know that, like I said, the backups are fully managed, and there's no way to run a backup unless it is run automatically. The backup schedule, when you create either an Azure SQL database or a managed instance, it will run a full backup on creation. And then once that full backup is run, it will start to run log backups. And the schedule that it follows is a full weekly, a differential daily, and a log backup somewhere between every 5 to 15 minutes. And that log backup frequency is driven by your transactional load. So there's they are monitoring the amount of transactional volume you're pushing. And as that transactional volume increases, your log backups will run more frequently. And then as that backs off, log backups will run less frequently. And so it does this in an effort to sort of maintain your log and prevent, out of control log growth. So that's the schedule. The backup location for platform as a service. The backup files are geo-redundant. They are written locally to the region that you are in, and then there are 2 copies, there are 3 total copies of the backup file written in that region. And then a copy is written to a paired data center for disaster recovery. So Azure data centers have regional pairs that are geolocated. So, the idea is that if you lose the drive that one of those local backups is sitting on, you have 2 others, and they will provision a new drive and create that 3rd copy. And then if the entire data center goes down for whatever reason, you will have that geo-redundant copy, and you'll be able to recover using that backup file. The backup retention for PAS, you default to 7 days of point-in-time recovery. So effectively, you are maintaining a week, a full backup and a week's worth of transaction log backups, or the diffs and the week's worth of trend log backups. That limit can be increased or decreased. It can be increased up to 35 days, and it can be decreased to 1 day. As you increase or decrease it, you are going to be paying more or less for storage. And one thing to point out is that for the basic tier and the hyperscale tier, that limit is 7 days. It's a hard limit. You then have the ability to do long-term retention. And I'll show you a screenshot of this in a little bit, but you can say, I want to keep the first full backup of every week for 12 weeks. I want to keep the first full backup of every month for 12 months. And then you can keep the yearly backup, the first backup, you can keep a backup for the year for up to 10 years. And you can specify what week you want that backup to come from. So anywhere 1 through 52, and you can maintain that backup for up to 10 years. And so this is geared toward, businesses that have legal requirements to maintain backup history or just archive of the data. So this is all there and can be configured in the portal. Last thing I'll say is that, so with Azure SQL Database, you have no capability to run a backup, an ad hoc backup. It is all managed. Within managed instance, you can run a copy-only full backup. And the backup needs to be written to Azure Blob Storage. There's no local storage that you have access to that you can write backups to. So you've got to write it out to Azure Blob Storage, and then from there you can pull it down and restore it to another managed instance. And Jared, I should know this, but can you take a managed instance backup and restore it to an instance of SQL Server 2019? or is it a version problem? All right.
I do not know the answer to that question. Okay. That's a good one.
I'll have to put that down, something to get an answer to before I do this again. Because the other thing about the PaaS offerings is basically features are being pushed to Azure before they are coming out in a CU. CU. So, the version of the PaaS SQL Server engine is kind of always, it's a different, what's the word I'm looking for? A different branch, but the features are being pushed, faster than they are to the installed product. So that's one of the reasons that I'm not sure about that, about being able to take these copy onlys and restore them to just an installed version of SQL Server, but I will find out. So that takes us into a demo, and I actually don't have a demo. I've got screenshots for just to show you what most of this stuff looks like. I will show you when I get into the recovery service, so we'll kind of go through some of the screens in the portal. But this is an Azure SQL Server. So I said that an Azure SQL Database is running on this resource called an Azure SQL Server. And when you come in here, there is a backups link down here. Do I have Zoom it running? I'm not even going to mess around with it. But so if you click this backups here, it will take you to this screen. So this shows me the available backups I have. Shows me the database that's being backed up. It shows me the earliest point in time restore point. So I said it's 7 days by default. I grabbed the screenshot earlier today. So at that point, my earliest restore point was June 3rd at midnight UTC. So that'd be like, actually I probably grabbed this yesterday, 7 p.m. yesterday here. And then if I want to restore, I would click the restore button here. When I click that restore button, it will take me to this screen and gives me information about my subscription and my resource group, my database, and then I can select a source. So in this case, it's point in time. The other option in this dropdown is long-term retention. So if I had long-term retention set up and was, keeping those backups, the weekly backup for 12 weeks and so on and so forth, I would be able to access that here. And then it shows me my earliest restore point. And then it also shows me this defaults to the latest restore point. So when I pulled this, and actually, okay, I did pull this today, my earliest restore point was 6/10/2021 at 5:10 p.m. UTC. And you can change these to any value between this earliest restore point and that latest restore point. So once you've done that, I didn't scroll down, because this will give you information about what the database will be called when you restore it. It defaults to the existing database name _ a date time value, and you can't do a replace. So in SQL Server, when you run a restore statement, when you write it yourself, there is a with parm called replace, and that says, okay, I know this database already exists. I want to restore over the existing copy. With both SQL database and managed instance, you can't do that. You have to restore it with a new name and then drop the old version and rename, or I suppose you could rename and then restore with the old name. But either way, you can't do the replace. And you can also restore to a different server. So it will give you the option to create a database with a different size, so more resources available to it or less. So if you have a production database that you're restoring, you can restore it to a database that has fewer resources in order to save money. So once you set all that up, you would click review and create, and it would validate your choices. And then you would click restore, and it would be off to the races, and it would tell you when it's done. In terms of the retention policy, so this is from that backup screen. Click this retention policies, and it will show you that my point in time restore is set to 7 days. This is a basic tier, so that is the only thing I've got. But were it not, I could adjust that anywhere from 1 to 35 days. And this is where you'll see those long-term retention values. I don't have them set here, but this is what it looks like when you set it. If I click configure policies here, it takes me to this screen, and this is where I could set the point in time. Because it's basic, I'm set at 7. And then I can set this to 12 weeks, 12 months, and 10 years for weekly, monthly, and yearly. And once again, I can choose which week I want to keep. So if I want to keep it the first week, I want to keep the last week, I want to keep any week in the middle, it will keep that for each year. When I click apply, it will take me back to the screen once it completes, and then you can see that those changes have taken 12 weeks, 12 months, and week 1 for 10 years. So that is backup and restore options for PAS. Any questions there about retention, about the managed piece?
Yeah, I have a question, and
Sure. What's up, Russ?
this might get a little involved here. If we want to save this for later, that's fine. But the question is this: is that usually you're going to restore something. You've had a train wreck type situation. And in my situations, it's been somebody comes along and says that, hey, we actually deleted such and such out of a table in such and such database. So we need to get that recovered and nothing else. So in which case you would do a restore like this, but it would restore it to a as you said, you're not replacing over it, you're storing it to a new named type thing.
Yep.
Database, whatever. How then do you go about getting that data from new name database to old name database?
So I would, 3 methods come to mind. One would be, actually 2, because the backpack won't work. So 2, let's go with 2. Are you familiar with generating scripts?
On premise stuff.
Yeah, so within Management Studio, and you can connect to both Managed Instance and SQL Database through Management Studio or Azure Data Studio. But if you right-click on the database, there is an option called Generate Scripts. And Generate Scripts will allow you to script out data for a table. Now that's going to script everything out. So if you are looking to replace a subset of data, that may not be the best thing for you, especially if you're dealing with large volume, because basically what the generate script does is it creates an insert statement for every row. So that may be a non-starter. The other option, and I need to look at this because I haven't played around with it, but it just came up on Twitter recently. Somebody was asking a question about being able to move like down a version. And there's a DBA tools commandlet, and I believe it's copy DBA database data. And that will allow you, I think that will allow you to move data from one place to another. But let me look into that, and I can get back to you on it.
Okay, thanks, Frank.
Yeah, I don't have, I wish I had a good answer, but I can find out for sure. Any other questions? At times like this, I'm really glad I live like a block from a firehouse. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but an ambulance just went by. So we're going to talk about backup and restore options for IaaS. Because this is SQL Server running on a VM, you can run native backups like you do today. And actually, I should add in, if you use a backup vendor, a tool for doing backups, Redgate or SentryOne or anything that does Quest, Lightspeed, anything that does backups, you can run those against SQL Server running on an Azure VM. You can use agent jobs to schedule those things. You can roll your own, or you can use Ola Hollengren's management maintenance solution. Got a little plug-in here for that. If you're not familiar, there's a link in the resources section to Ola's site. It is a full maintenance solution. Backups are included, index maintenance, and integrity checking. There is a store procedure that gets created along with a number of jobs. You run the maintenance solution, it creates these things, and you can just schedule those jobs, and they will run and they will back up to the storage location of your choice. With IaaS, you can back up. There are drives, on the VM because it's just a VM. So you could allocate a backup drive and back up to that. You also have the option to back up to Azure Blob Storage. So you can do all that stuff through OLAs. The next option is called automated backups. And this is a feature that you can set. I'll show you in a second, but when you create SQL Server on an Azure VM, there are two resources that are created. There is the virtual machine, and then there is a SQL virtual machine. They both have the same name, but you would go to that SQL virtual machine and enable automated backups. You got two schedule options. One, you can schedule full and log backups just like you normally would, or you can say, take care of it for me. And in that case, it would be a similar schedule to what we were looking at for PaaS. And the log backups, once again, are driven by transactional volume. This does require an Azure storage account. You can't write to a drive on the VM. You've got to write to an Azure storage account. So that is one thing to keep in mind. Just to show you what the automated backups look like. As I said, I've got my virtual machine here on the second to the last line, and then below that, circled in red, is the SQL virtual machine. If I go to that, I've got a backups option in my settings, and then I can enable this. And when I enable that, it will ask me how long my retention period is going to be. I can set it anywhere from 1 to 30 days. I select my storage account. I can encrypt my backups. I can back up system databases if I want. And then I can either let Azure schedule those backups, or I can flip it to manual and schedule them myself. Click apply, and that will turn that on. I don't have this turned on for the VM in question because the last time I did this, I had this enabled, and then I'm going to talk about Recovery Services Vault in a minute, and this broke Recovery Services Vault, which was unpleasant. But so I don't have it turned on, but you have the slides. You can go in here and set this up if you so choose. And there we go. Talk about Azure's Recovery Services Vault. So Recovery Services Vault is sort of an overarching backup solution for Azure. You can back up different kinds of resources. You can back up virtual machines. You can back up SQL Server databases. I think it's SAP HANA, and there's one other option. And I'm going to actually go into Azure and kind of poke around in this so I can show you what those are. As I said, you figure VM backups, SQL Server backups. If you want to run SQL Server backups using Azure Recovery Services Vault, the VM that those SQL Server databases are running on needs to be backed up. So you're going to back up your VM to get those the SQL Server backups. Here you can create a backup policy. So this is just a screenshot, and you set the backup frequency. You can set the retention of your daily backup point, your weekly backup point, monthly backup point, and yearly. So this is a lot like what we looked at with PAS. The difference is that you've got more leeway on retaining this daily backup point. So in this case, it's set to 180 days. You can also enable differential backups. And in that case, I believe that this full backup will kick to weekly, and then you can schedule this diff backup at other weekdays. Set your log backup frequency and then how long your log backups are retained. And it says here down at the bottom, this is informational. If your database isn't simple, you're not going to get log backups because you can't. So just letting you know that. Just some stuff to know, and these are some of the lessons that I've learned. Your backups can be set to be locally redundant or geo-redundant. And you build a backup policy. That's what I showed you here. And this is where you would set that retention level. And something to know is that you cannot change that once it's set. So I had a client and we had set up Recovery Services Vault backups for both test and prod, and we had set them both to be geo-redundant. Because you are storing more copies of your backups when you are geo-redundant costs more because you're paying for more storage. So they wanted to switch test to be locally redundant. They actually had to stand up a new backup policy, take everything out, all the test databases out of the old policy and put them in the new policy. Another point, you can only have a database or a VM in one policy. You can't have multiple policies backing up the same thing. For SQL Server VMs, when you do the VM backup, there is an option to backup OS disk only, and that is recommended for SQL Server because you are backing up the databases, the other drives, the files on those drives are going to be backed up. The data on those drives is going to be backed up. Backing them up with the VM backup is redundant and can actually lead to contention if you're trying to run a SQL Server backup while the OS backup is running, cause problems. The portal shows backup health for each item. And the important note at the bottom goes with that bullet point because it's running full backups and potentially differential backups and log backups. If I'm running fulls daily, let's say I run my full on Monday and it works, and then I'm running all my log backups, run my full on Tuesday, and the full on Tuesday fails, but the log backups continue to run. I still have a valid backup chain, an LSN chain for my backups. So if I want to do a point in time recovery to sometime on Tuesday, it can restore that full from Monday and then restore all of the log backups behind it. Within the portal, that database with that failed full will still show as healthy. Technically it is, but it's just something that you want to keep in mind, because in my mind as a DBA, I had a backup fail. I want to know about it. And there are alerts that will go out for these things, but in the case, I found this out because I was not on the distribution list for the alerts, but I was in charge of managing the backups. And I went in and looked, and I said, oh, these things are all healthy. And then I was doing some just poking around in the system tables and realized that there was a database that hadn't had a full backup run successfully in about 7 days. So like I said, just keep that in mind. And then one other point to make here is that backups are enabled and disabled at the database level. So when you go into the portal, you will see all of the databases that are being backed up under a backup policy. If you want to disable 10 of them, you have to disable each one individually. And there are PowerShell commandlets for this and AZCLI commandlets, but they're not, the documentation could be better. So it can be somewhat of a challenge to write scripts to automate some of this enabling and disabling. And talk about one of the reasons you would do that in the next slide. Any questions before I go there? If not, More things to know, and this is specifically around availability group databases. You can back up AG databases using Recovery Services Vault, but your full backups will run against the primary node. You can run AG backup of an availability group database off of a secondary using native backups, but you have to run a copy-only backup. And Azure Recovery Services Vault doesn't give you the ability to run a copy-only backup. And for that reason, regardless of how your backup options are set for your availability group, and your options are primary only, secondary, what's the word, preferred, secondary only, regardless of how that is set, that full backup will always run off the primary. If you do have your backup preferences set to secondary only, it will run your log backups off the secondary. And the reason for that is just the inability to run a copy-only backup. So something else to keep in mind, and this is another thing that I learned the hard way, where we had configured the AG to be secondary only, and it just didn't process in my head that that full backup against the secondary had to be copy only, and that's not an option in Recovery Services Vault. So that. You can restore from a Recovery Services Vault backup. You can do a point-in-time restore, and you can do it to 3 different destinations. You can either restore to a different server. So if you wanted to take a Recovery Services Vault backup and restore it to a test server, you can do that. One thing to know here is that the source and destination for the restore have to be in the same backup policy. And this is problematic if you have in the same subscription. So if you have a test subscription and a prod subscription, you can restore to a file and then copy that file over to the other side, but you can't do that restore directly through the portal. You can also overwrite an existing database. So if you want to, somebody deleted stuff out of a table and you want to restore the entire database and just replace it, you can do that on the same server. And then finally, you can do the restore to file. It's effectively running a restore, but it is generating a .bak file, and you specify the location that's going to go to, and then you can do what you will with it from there. And yeah, here, say destination must be in the same subscription as the source. So ran into that with prod subscription, test subscription. They wanted to do a periodic refresh, and trying to put together a process to do that was interesting. Basically, I was doing the restore to file and then copying that file to a location that the test instance could see, and then doing the restore. So it's sort of 3x in terms of time. So let me stop sharing, and I'm going to share out. Find what I'm looking for. Apologies for the delay. Any questions while I'm fumbling around? Is anyone still there? All right. So
yeah, we're here.
Okay.
It's still
all good. So this is the portal. This is a resource group I've got, and I've got a bunch of resources in here. There's my virtual machine, my SQL virtual machine, and then I have a Recovery Services Vault here. So if I click on this, it will take me to the Recovery Services Vault when it decides. Okay. So it will take me to the splash page, and then down here on the left, I have a number of different options. This getting started, this is where I would go if I did not already have anything in here. So I would say, okay, I have a VM that's running SQL Server. I would come in here, and it asks me where my workload is running. And you can actually back up on-premises stuff using this. And one of the big bonuses to this from a management perspective is it basically gives you a single pane of glass into your backups. And as I said, you can Azure Stack is the kind of on-prem Azure. It's Jared, is there a better way to put that? Is it cloud in a box, or I thought there was a marketing term for Azure Stack.
I think of it the same way. I think of it as basically Azure, your own private Azure, or
Yeah, so it's like
the
a private
Azure
cloud.
backplane on-prem. Yep.
Yeah, so it's like a private cloud and then on premises. So you can actually point Azure Recovery Services at your on-premises SQL Server or your on-premises VM, and it will back stuff up over the wire. I would probably recommend having Express Route in that case, but you can do it. And then what do you want to back up? So defaults to virtual machine. I can back up an Azure file share. That was the fourth one. HANA, or SQL Server on Azure VM, and then SAP HANA on Azure VM. So I can back up all of those things. Once I tell it what I want to back up, and I click back up, and I have a policy. In this case, this is a VM policy, so it's going to back up daily at 8:30 a.m. UTC, and then I would add a virtual machine. I don't have one to add because the one that I've got is already added, but that's how that looks. And then again, if I select SQL Server, I would start discovery, and that will actually look at all of the VMs that I've already registered, and it will look for SQL Server instances and the databases running on those SQL Server instances. And then once it does that discovery, then I can configure the backup for those databases. You can create multiple policies or schedules. So let's say I have system databases and user databases running, and I want to back up the system databases weekly and the user database is on a different schedule. I can do that. It gives you the ability to get that granular. So once I have configured my backups, they will show up here under backup items. So if I click backup items, why don't I have SQL registered? Okay, that's dumb. Well, let's go back in here and set this up. So if I click configure backup, I've got my backup policy. I don't have any items selected, but I can click add. And here I've got my instance of SQL Server. So my SQL Server, my VM, and my instance name, which in this case is the default instance. And then I've got 4 databases running, or 5 databases, model. I don't know why I have 2 copies of model, master, model, MSDB, and worldwide importers. I can select them all. I can select one, I can select a group. But if I click OK here, this is where it takes me to configuring the backup. So this will retain my first backup of the year, or first Sunday for 10 years. It's going to back up the log every 2 hours, retain that for 15 days. And okay, so there's more stuff here. And now if I click enable backup, this should have worked before. I don't know. Oh, I did get an angry message. Okay, well, let's see what goes on here. So it's going to be less than exciting for you if I don't actually have anything to show you. So let me jump back. Go back to my recovery services vaults. It's a pain. I probably should have checked that. All right, so I don't have anything here, which is upsetting. We'll see if it comes back and actually does what I want it to do. But if I did have something here, it would give me the database name. It would give me the instance that database is running on. It would tell me what type it was. And then this is where that healthy would show up. So in the case that my full backup failed, but my log backups continue to run, I would get a backup status of healthy here. Oh man, I'm trying to think what I can do. Let me bear with me for 1 second. Don't think I configured here. No. Oh, okay. So here's an example. Okay, so got my database. I've got my instance, the type, in this case, standalone instance that can also read availability group. And in this case, these are all not reachable. And the reason that these are not reachable is because I believe this VM no longer exists. So the recovery services vault is set up, the backup policy is set up, but it can't communicate with that that particular server. If I click on one of these databases, there's not going to be a lot of interesting information here, but you can get an idea of what the screen will look like. So I clicked on Wide World Importers. It gives me information about the vault it's in, the subscription, all that good stuff. In this case, my last restore point is from April. My oldest restore point is from April because things have been deleted. But down here at restore points, this, if the database was completely healthy, and in this case, the backups had been running for more than 24 hours, this should be all green. Because if you look at this, the legend down at the bottom, the green indicates log point in time, gray indicates no logs available. So, like I said, if log backups were running and you had a backup chain that was valid for 24 hours, this entire graph would be green. If for some reason your log backups had stopped, let's say you shut your VM down, you were doing maintenance, you shut your VM down, log backups couldn't run, you would get a gray block and it would be by time. And if you notice when I mouse over this, it shows me the time. So in this case, it's Wednesday at 6 p.m. So yesterday at 6 p.m. So that is, like I said, not terribly interesting. There's no data there. Let's see. And that's still running. I'll see if that comes back. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to show you. So just, I talked about managing these things one at a time. So come back here. We've got 7 data. Yeah,
would
go
this
ahead,
be a
Ross.
good time for a question?
Yeah.
We've got a question on the chat here. What is the recommended method to back up a stretch database?
Wow, that's I don't know. I haven't thought about stretch database in a long time. I am not sure. I'm not sure what the functionality there is. I can find out. I mean, if you're not familiar, stretch database gives you the ability to push like archive data to Azure. So you're running your SQL Server instance on-prem, and let's say I've got a financial database and I have to keep 10 years worth of data. But I don't want to pay for keeping 10 years of data on-prem. I can push archive data like partitions to Azure. And I don't know. I don't know what the options are. I can find out for sure.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Amina Lalani's on the chat here and attending. She's contributed a couple of links here that
Okay.
talk about backing up stretch databases and
Okay, cool.
um,
So yeah, look at the chat.
recovery.
If you don't get the answer you're looking for from those links, I'll show you my contact information at the end again, and you can hit me up with a question.
And thank you, Amina.
Yes, thank you. So, I've got this backup policy with these 7 databases. If I want to, let's say I want to disable these backups for whatever reason, I have to go into each one of these. So if I click on Wide World Importers again, across the top here, you can see I've got the ability to stop backup. So I can stop this backup, and then when I am done doing whatever I want to do, I can come back in here and click Resume. And that has to be done one at a time. And when you're dealing with a backup policy that's got 150 databases in it, you can filter this by server or by database name, but it still can be somewhat of a challenge to come in here and click things, because as an old school DBA, I prefer to type rather than click. So that's why I said that the PowerShell commandlets exist, Azure CLI commandlets exist, but they can be less than easy to use. So these are just things to consider when you're using Recovery Services Vault. I've sort of come around to the idea that having the single pane of glass into my VM backups as well as my SQL backups is a positive thing, but there are still some challenges. So let me just see, that is still running. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show you what this looks like in real life, but I can, if anybody wants to see what it looks like, I can get it so it's working, and I can show it to you, or if you've got questions about it, like I said, feel free to reach out. I'm going to stop sharing again and flip back to my slides. So that was my demo, and that's basically it. I do have resources in here, so a link about automated backups, a link to Ola's maintenance solution, and then backup and restore options for SQL Server on Azure VMs. So this kind of gets into more detail about automated backups and Recovery Services Vault, and then a link specifically about Recovery Services Vault. And I should grab Amina's links about Stretch Database and put them in here. So like I said, I haven't thought about that in some time. I think that is all I've got. Let me just jump back really fast, like I said, to my contact information. So if you have questions, anybody else has any questions, you can feel free to ask them now. If you have questions you want to email me about, you can hit me up at screebydba@gmail, or you can send me a message on Twitter, or just CC me on a message if I don't follow you, you can't DM me. So are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Yep.
So is this your own, your very own lab?
It's actually my company lab.
Okay.
So, and yeah, I realized today that I had torn down the roof. I'm happy I didn't tear it down, but it's been running for about a month, and I'm expecting a nastygram from work because I had the VMs running even. So, but yes, it is my lab. Were you interested in kind of cost?
Well, yeah, kind of, because work won't let me play.
Yeah, so in terms of the cost of the Recovery Services Vault, setting up the Recovery Services Vault, I don't believe there's a charge for that resource itself. Where you start to get charged is for the storage that you're using. And so that's where locally redundant versus geo-redundant and your retention policies are good to keep in mind. And the same is true for the automated backups. So if you provision an Azure SQL database, You can't turn that off. It's going to be out there and you're going to get charged for it. The nice thing, I probably should just share my screen, make this easier. Let's try to navigate to anything embarrassing. Like if I, for example, if I go back to my Azure SQL Database, which is a basic, where's billing? You would think they would make it more visible. What I wanted to show you is that the basic Azure SQL Database, the estimated cost is $5 a month. So it's not, you're not going to necessarily break the bank. And one of the cool things about Azure, in addition to it being managed, is that you have the ability to scale things up and scale them down. So if you want to run, at a higher level, just for testing or, just to see how something works, you can scale it back down to basic. But, you want to just kind of keep in mind the things you can do to save money. And those things are scale down resources that you can't turn off. The Azure VM, you can stop that and it will retain all of the storage behind it. And so when you start it up, it will start up just like a normal VM would, but you will pay for that storage. So if you provision a 500 gig database and you disable or turn the VM off, you're going to be paying for that storage. And then once again, with Recovery Services Vault or automated backup, you're going to get charged for that storage. And there are calculators. There is an Azure calculator to say, okay, I want to retain 35 days worth of point in time, and then you can tell it how you want to retain the long-term retention, and it will give you an estimated cost of what that is going to be. And I actually just thought about the fact that I put together a calculator of my own for a client that I should have demoed here, but too late now. Next time, if anybody's interested in it, I'm happy to share. Any other questions, or does that answer your question about cost, Ross?
Oh, yes, it does. I've been kind of afraid of going into the Azure side. I've been messing with AWS.
Okay.
And, they have a free tier or near free.
Yeah.
And sounds like Azure has something similar.
Yeah, Jared, is the 200 hours still available, or is there something similar? I haven't looked in a while. Like 200 hours per month.
I don't know. I thought it was a dollar amount. I thought it was like $200.
$200, that's it. Yeah,
Yeah, it was like $200 or $250 if you I thought that's with the MSDN. Otherwise, it's just like
yeah, it's a Visual Studio subscription.
Yeah,
and it's 150, I think. For some accounts, it's 150 per month, so it renews every month, and for some, it's like 200. Yeah.
Yeah. But you can, I mean, like Frank was saying, you can do a lot for 150 bucks as long as you're smart with your settings.
Yeah. Yeah, and just make sure that you are aware of what you've got and don't leave it running like I did. Oh, one other thing I should mention. So I talked about Azure SQL Database and managed instance under PaaS. I didn't demo with a managed instance because that is expensive, relatively expensive, more expensive than my company likes to pay for. So I have demoed them in the past, but I have made sure that I've torn them down very quickly. I think it's like the lowest, depending on the data center you're in, is like $500 a month, which is not exorbitant, but more than my company wants to pay for me to play around with this stuff. So yeah, let me just flip back over in case anybody missed my contact information. If you have a question that you don't want to ask now, or you think of something after the fact, feel free to reach out because I do like talking about this stuff. Any other questions?
I don't see anything on the chat.
Okay. If you're not doing anything at 11 o'clock Central tomorrow, there is a conference called Data Minutes. Two guys in Europe who have put on a conference called Data Grillin' for a number of years. They skipped last year and this year because of the pandemic, but they will be back on with Data Grillin' next year. Data Minutes is all lightning talks. So it is like eight hours, maybe more than that, maybe 12 hours of 10-minute presentations. And I'm doing a presentation at 11 a.m. on accelerated database recovery, which is a really cool new feature in 2019.
I'm after you,
so if you,
Frank.
All right.
I'm after you. 11:30.
I will stick around and listen to you. I'm upset because I've never heard Matthew Roach present, and he's presenting directly opposite me. So one of these days. But yeah, that's all I've got. If nobody has any questions, I thank you very much for the opportunity. This is always fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
for
Frank.
Presenting, Frank.
No problem.
Thank you.
You are very welcome, and everybody have a good evening and enjoy your weekend.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks.
All right.
Everybody have a good one.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you, everybody.